All right, good afternoon, folks. This is Tips for a Successful aaS. My name is Mike Dorman. I work for Twilio SendGrid here in Denver. I'm on our tech ops team that handles all our physical infrastructure as well as our virtualization and container orchestration platforms. Before that, I was at GoDaddy for about 7 years, where I worked on our OpenStack private cloud and a couple other cloud servers products over there. Overall, I've been in the SaaS industry for about 16 years, so I've got a long history of running different platforms, different software as a service in the cloud. So I just wanted to share with you today a few tips that I've picked up from my experience that I think can help those go a little more smoothly for you. So before you build anything, if you have that luxury, try to understand and write down who your customers are, who your users are going to be. Think about their perspective, think about their needs and wants, the problems that they need to solve, and what their expectations for your platform are going to be. And you should actually go talk to them and ask them those questions and not just assume you know, because you probably don't. If you have like a product manager or product owner kind of person in your org, they can help you with that as well. And this is something that we kind of missed on the OpenStack cloud at GoDaddy. We made this assumption that we're going to provide this cloud platform to everybody. Everybody will go to the cloud. It'll be great. It didn't turn out quite that way. And we didn't take the time to really understand that perspective before we built the thing. So next, as a foundation, you should really write down what your platform does and also what it doesn't. This is also known as a service contract. It's really just a way to manage those expectations with your users and define what the demarks are between what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. If you don't do that, you end up with all these bad assumptions on both sides, both for you and your users, and you end up being the default support channel for basically everything. We experienced this at GoDaddy because we didn't have that documentation in place. So any problem that happened inside a VM running on our platform, that troubleshooting came to us by default just because it was running in our cloud, even though we really had no way to touch that stuff inside the VMs and no way to influence it. Try to find some early adopters in your organization that can serve as your beta test users that you can get some early feedback on. These should be people that are kind of knowledgeable and experienced and understand the infrastructure, understand the paradigm shifts that are involved. And it's super important to build these relationships with those early adopters because they become your ambassadors to everybody else that's going to use your platform in the future. This is something that we actually had really good success with at GoDaddy, and I've seen it at SendGrid as well. At GoDaddy, we had a team that was building a public cloud servers product on top of our OpenStack cloud. They were really knowledgeable, really easy to work with. They understood the infrastructure and kind of the best ways to architect things. And it was super great to get that early feedback on new features and things that we really should have been doing differently. I've seen this at SendGrid as well. Our tech ops department dog foods anything that we put in the Kubernetes cluster to help work out any bugs or any issues there. It's just super helpful. Try to focus on iterative improvements to always be delivering value, always be delivering something better for your users. If you're doing Scrum or Agile, this is kind of what that's meant for. It's really about breaking down the work into smaller chunks and just constantly rolling out tiny little improvements all the time. The goal should be every sprint to have something visible that you can either demo or announce to your users as something that benefits them. This was a challenge for us at GoDaddy a little bit because we would get sidetracked on projects that didn't really bring value to the customers just because of other requirements or other needs that we needed to take care of. But the downside there is that we weren't showing any value to our users, and that hurt our reputation because from their perspective, we just weren't doing anything for them. Watch for paradigm shifts that your users might need to be helped through. And these can be hard for you to see because you've already made that shift. Good examples of this are, architecting for the cloud, architecting for failure, being cloud native, doing things in a containerized fashion. This is another spot where you need to write this stuff down, like document the best practices and get that out there to folks so it's in front of them. And involve those early adopters as well to help disseminate that info to really kind of teach and train everyone to get their mindset in a different place. Again, we saw this at GoDaddy where people had a little difficulty embracing that cloud way of thinking. Again, this was 5 years ago, so a little bit earlier time. But we saw people continue to treat their VMs as pets instead of cattle, kind of hoarding resources and that kind of thing instead of treating them as ephemeral. And what would happen was when we did maintenances, it would affect those pet resources, and the maintenances would be pretty impactful for people. And speaking of maintenances, take those things pretty seriously. Try to have as light of a touch as possible to impact your users as little as possible. Even small little blips or just small interruptions can be a big deal for people that are depending on you. And this particular one is personally kind of tough for me, because you think the people that are building on here, they should be doing cloud native, they should be building for failure, they should be architect their things to be resilient. So if we just have to kill off a few instances or reboot to hypervisor, it's no big deal, they can just spin them back up again. And even at SendGrid, we do have some applications running in Cube that really probably shouldn't be there. They're not really architected the right way. So in my brain, it's like, hey, why do I need to treat these things with kid gloves? Like, I just want to get my upgrade done. I want to get my change out. But at the end of the day, this exposes a lot of the single points of failure. It exposes a lot of things outside of your platform and can even lead to outages that are kind of larger than yourself. And it just puts more scrutiny and more attention on your platform, which you really don't want, right? It just makes your life more difficult to have that attention and scrutiny. So again, try to minimize that impact of maintenance. But when you do have to do maintenances, try to do some good signaling to your users that they can expect. So think about this as handing back a 503 error instead of just a TCP timeout. If you actually give them an error, it's a lot easier to deal with than kind of this unknown situation of we're not really sure what's happening. And you should put this in that service contract so people can read that and know what to expect from your platform when you are doing maintenances or where there are problems. Another piece of this is to recognize the systems that you're dependent on. That if they have a problem, it's going to affect you. And just try to build in that signaling so that if there is a problem someplace, your users are a little easier, can deal with it a little easier. Measure everything from the very start. This was always an afterthought for me, and I think that's a pretty common practice. It just gets overlooked. Over-measure, like do your best guess at what you think is going to be valuable from the start. Start measuring that stuff, and then you can always adjust it later. And then actually look at those measurements and get a sense for what your steady state, kind of what your trends are, and then you'll be able to notice what the outliers are and what to pay attention to. When you're troubleshooting issues or trying to figure something out and you have that thought of like, man, I really wish I had a graph of this particular thing so I could see what's happening, like write that down and then circle back and add that metric later so that the next time something happens, you've got some numbers to look at. And I think about this from the user's perspective as well. Like they care about error rates and latency, so you should too. You've got to keep up on capacity. There are a few times I can think of where we ran out of capacity and it turns into a nightmare, right? Because it's really bad for your platform's reputation. People lose trust in you. They start hoarding their resources even more because they're worried about you running out again, and they want to be able to have those resources available when they need it. It's kind of difficult because this isn't always something that you're looking at on a daily basis, but you really should. It's tied into the metrics point as well. You need to be measuring this and paying attention. It's super important because it goes to the trust of your platform. To help protect against that, you should build some backstops. And what this means is resource quotas. Those have got to be there just to kind of protect your system from runaway processes or rogue users, things like that. There are a couple different approaches to this. You can do quotas based on budget. Maybe that makes sense in your organization. You can just set like fairly large quotas for everybody. That will protect you against runaway provisioning. But you've got to do something. Even if you're not like sending a bill for real money to your users, you've got to do something to protect the integrity of your system. And related to this, it really helps if you can report to people what they're using, show them what they're doing and how that's impacting the rest of the people on the platform, everybody else in the company. Try to translate that to money, even if it doesn't really make financial sense. Try to translate it into a number because people can understand that a little more intuitively when they see a dollar figure. So just try to translate that in some way. If you don't show everybody what they're using, they just kind of remain blissfully ignorant and continue to using more and more and more without really any consequences. And you run out of capacity and you have a tragedy of the commons situation where everybody uses it and nobody has an incentive to conserve. So just a few bullet points there for takeaways. I won't read those. There's a more detailed write-up. If you go to x.co/success as, or that QR code will get you there as well. So basically everything I said is written out. You can recapture it there. My contact info as well if you would like to reach out. I appreciate your time. Thanks so much.